Well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. I started the week by watching the first Daniel Craig James Bond film, and I end the week by watching the latest and final Daniel Craig James Bond film. That's right, I went to the theatre last night and saw No Time to Die. The Daniel Craig film has been quite the sort of temperamental journey back from people's reactions to Daniel Craig being cast as Bond, the delight of Casino Royale, the troubled nature of Quantum of Solace, partly influenced by the writer's strike, but also just not being a particularly well thought out film. A film that was desperately trying too hard to be in the manner of Jason Bourne. Of course, almost the renaissance with Skyfall, and almost a return to form, a sense of re-establishing an identity for the new era of Bond within the context of what came before, but also sort of going on its own path. Spectre, which was unfortunately a bastardization of that, where the wrong lessons had been learned from Skyfall, and there was a mixture, I suppose, of interesting ideas and just poor storytelling and just a general sense of confusion. And then No Time to Die. And I have to say, No Time to Die is a perfect encapsulation of the journey of Bond. It by no means is the perfect Daniel Craig. It's definitely not the best James Bond film of all time. It's definitely not the best Daniel Craig James Bond film. But there's just something about it that feels complete. It really does round off the Daniel Craig era in a way that I suppose no other James Bond film has ever done, where it feels like a complete story. You know, there's a big conversation about Bond in cinema, how Bond has always been even episodic's not quite correct, but standalone. Bond is whatever he is within the context of each film, but he's almost unchanging. He goes into each film the same as he leaves them. Whereas, of course, in the era of serialization, of more complex character arcs, where we don't want sort of your A-Team, your Avengers style stories where, you know, characters go in, they do the adventure and they leave. We want that greater sense of ongoing arc, and we see a character change and develop. And of course the challenge for Bond is that's never what he was, and yet that is what audiences were desiring of him. They wanted to see a Bond that grew and changed and was affected by events within the narrative, but at the same time retained some of the Bondness that we would recognise. And it's an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk, because of course people still want him to be James Bond as we know him. We want to sort of shave off the corners, the old-fashioned ideas of Bond, the things that came from Ian Fleming's novels that were problematic now, you know, in relation to the character. The elements of the stories, whether it's Connery, Moore, Dalton or Brosnan, aspects of him that we like, but again, those elements that haven't aged well or no longer appeal to modern audiences. And it's a difficult thing to be all of these things and tell a compelling story that doesn't feel like it is just being a message film. It is trying to be a James Bond story as we recognise him. And as I say, the journey across the films has demonstrated the struggle that filmmakers have had with it. And No Time to Die, the great successes of No Time to Die is the fact that it recognises those things. No Time to Die is an encapsulation of everything from Casino Royale to now, where the film knows where to nod to each film within the Daniel Craig era, and then also to nod further back to the longer legacy and heritage of Bond. So you get, narratively speaking, you get acknowledgements of the story of Craig's Bond, where it feels like one continuous story, a character who has gone through all the things we have seen and has been affected by them, and this is the completion of that character's story. You know, so it references back to Blofeld, who appears in this film. It references back to Vesper. You know, we get appearances from Felix. Of course, we have the current MI6 team with M and Moneypenny and Q, and even subtler references to each of the Craig era films. And then on top of that, thematically, you get that sense of a style that refers back to the Moore era, a style that refers back to the Brosnan era. It feels like, you know, Cary Fukunaga really feels like he understands what Bond was and how to encapsulate everything that the story of James Bond has been from 1963 to now, and how to really, like, 62 to now, sorry, and really at least retain the soul of Bond whilst trying to wrap up the story of this specific iteration. And it is really good in that respect. This is a long film. This is a very long film for a James Bond film. It is the longest one. It's 2 hours 45, and it really does carry that, because it is a saga. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I've talked a lot in this series of videos about how many films have an issue with running time, and how sometimes they overstay their welcome or they overstretch themselves when a shorter story, a more contained story, is better. This is a demonstration of when it is right to tell a saga, because this feels like it has so much to say about Bond, so much to tell about, you know, where we left Daniel Craig's Bond with Madeline and their story picking up from Spectre, tying in the story of Spectre, and then going forwards and having the sort of the new threat, which of course is Rami Malek's character, who's... Do you remember his name, producer wife?
Hang on.
Not off the top. Okay, I'll come back to you, but again, the Rami Malek's villain, and admittedly this is a sign of some of the problems in this film, but, you know, you get that sense of each act of this film feels like it is telling a huge chapter within... Safin, that's right. Safin. And it feels like each act is telling a major chapter within the final story of this Bond. And so, tonally, you go from setting to setting to setting, different feelings with different sections of the film. And as I say, it does feel like certain parts feel like a Moore Bond, certain parts feel like a Brosnan Bond. It actually thematically does feel like it's at least paying lip service to the evolution of Bond as a character. And then, of course, we have the new elements. As I say, you have Rami Malek's Safin as this sort of different... They're definitely going for something different with his kind of villain. You know, the idea that, okay, his relationship is not to Bond, but to Madeline. And that's... And the sort of quote-unquote love triangle, and that's very loose because of the nature of the relationship between the three, but between Bond, Safin and Madeline. And the tension between the three of them. You also have the new 007 Nomi, who, you know, of course became this big storm of, oh, she is a female queer black Bond. You know, this is definitely a sign of a changing conversation where it comes to, you know, what encapsulates 007. And, you know, she is really good in this. I really like her. I think she is a great Bond. Oh, well, sorry, not a great Bond. A great 007. A great addition to the team. I do have some criticisms, but I will come back to that. And again, the inclusion of this new character doesn't feel like it's sort of thumbing its nose at James Bond, at the sort of the history of misogyny and racism within Bond, and sort of saying, well, we are the new woke Bond. It actually feels like she is a fully rounded character, and within the context of the narrative is threatening Bond, you know, as an equal You get that sense where it's like she feels he is a threat because she is, she is new, she's really efficient and good at her job, but at the same time, he comes back and that is a threat to her. And of course, she is a threat to him because she represents all the things that will replace him. And so you get that sort of tension relationship between the two, but that works so well because they are, there is an animosity, but also a sort of comradeship between them. You also have this other character called Paloma who's introduced. That character, I'm conflicted. I do think the scene that she is in, and she's in a very brief part of the film, is good. I just have an issue where it comes to the fact that they obviously wanted to do something with that, where they sort of play her as this sort of ditzy character who feels a bit wet behind the ears and Bond sort of rolls his eyes at. But at the same time, it subverts our expectations of that, and that's interesting. But there is an issue contained within that, and I'll get into that shortly. And so you have the sort of the new characters mixed in with the old, mixed in with the current, and of course James Bond at the centre. And it's just good. It is a good film. It feels epic. It feels like it has scale and action and great character work. But it doesn't lose focus on the fact that this is supposed to be the James Bond story. If anything, some of the other elements suffer because they are absolutely focusing on James Bond and his story. And then, this film isn't without flaw, though. Because it's such an epic, and it's so, it's going for this huge scale, grand finale story for James Bond and trying to be all of these things that I've talked about. You do get that sense that there are elements that just suffer because of it. It does, it does go from set piece to set piece to set piece, huge character moments for a lot of different characters and arcs and completing certain characters' stories. That it does mean that there is a lot of content all squeezed into this film. And as I say, there are certain things that I feel like do suffer because it's just trying to cram so much in. As I say, Paloma, a really interesting character, really genuinely an interesting mini story within the James Bond sort of mythos. But because she only has this one sequence and a very short arc where it's supposed to be this subversion of what we expect her to be from when she's introduced, and then once that mini arc is complete, which is all contained within one set piece, her story is over, and that's it, and we don't see her again. And although that is interesting, it does make you question, because the other issue is, like I say, Nomi, the new 007, is such a rich and interesting character, and yet we don't get to know her that well. We know things about her. She demonstrates how efficient, how good an agent she is, how she is the new face of spycraft and of MI6. And yet at the same time, I still felt like the character got shortchanged a little bit. Like, we could have gone a bit deeper with her. I found out things about her character from things I learned before watching the film, more than I did seeing her on camera. And so therefore, it does make me question whether you needed both of those characters. That possibly the real estate given to Paloma could have been cut out to just expand the Nomi character. Because I do feel like we don't really know her by the end of the film. And hey, that might be a sign that we might get, popular enough, we could get a spin-off with sort of this new 007. But if we don't, I do... And that's not to say she isn't an efficient, well-told character. She is. I don't feel like that she wasn't complete within the context of the story. I just felt like we could have learned more about her as a character and gone into more depth about sort of who she is and her relationship to MI6 and you know, what kind of spy she is, just that little bit more. And I suppose that is good, because I wanted to know more about that character. The other issue, as I say, is Safin. Safin is an interesting villain to some degree, but there is something to be said that his character does disappear for whole stretches because there's so much going on, and there's sort of sections dedicated to Madeline and her trustworthiness, to Spectre, to Blofeld. Safin does, like I say, there are stretches of the film where he just doesn't actively play a part. He's sort of the hand behind a lot of events, but you don't. He doesn't actively feel like he's part of the story. And so when he does finally become sort of the main focus and the main antagonist, it feels like we've had to rush through a lot of things. And it just feels like, I don't know, his character, his motivations are there, but they aren't quite as rich as the story wants them to be. And we do get this interesting backstory, as I say. His relationship to Madeline is really interesting. But it just doesn't feel quite enough. His character doesn't feel like enough. And Rami Malek, you know, who is becoming this huge actor, you know, this great actor, all the way, you know, at the same level as Mads Mikkelsen was back in Casino Royale. You just feel a bit like he just doesn't get the development that he deserves on camera. I mean, the plan that he has is really interesting. It's actually a really interesting villainous plan. But it almost feels like the plan is a little bit more interesting than the person behind it. You know, and the worst thing you can have, I mean, if we just focus on the Craig era, where you've got, Mads Mikkelsen's villain, you've got Green from Quantum of Solace, you've got Silver from Skyfall, and Blofeld from Spectre. Green is without doubt the worst of those villains, because the vision of that character was that he was supposed to be kind of nobody. He's supposed to be this sort of guy who you wouldn't notice. He doesn't have a thing like he bleeds from the eyes, or a scar, or like his facial deformity, which of course, in terms of cinema, they are trying to get away from because of the sort of the negative text in relation, you know, representation of people with facial injuries. But the fact that he's so unremarkable makes him the worst of the Craig era Bond villains. I'd probably say that Mads Mikkelsen, his villain, probably Le Chiffre, is probably the best one. Maybe Silver, actually, thinking about it. Silver or Le Chiffre are two of the best ones, and of course Javier Bardem and Mads Mikkelsen are amazing at them. And Rami Malek is almost there. He's not as bad as Green, and he's not as convoluted and ridiculous as Blofeld is in Spectre, but he's not quite at the level of Silver or Le Chiffre. Speaking of Blofeld, in fact, Blofeld himself is a lot better in this, because the thing I hated in Spectre was the fact, as I've said, Spectre felt like a bastardization of Skyfall without understanding Skyfall. In terms of, the whole point of Skyfall is the fact that it's sort of the pseudo-familial relationship between Bond, Silver and M, that M is almost like a mother figure to the both of them, and on some level they're brothers. But that's all metaphorical. It's not supposed to be a literal sense of their character. But for whatever reason, they took that into Spectre, and so they made Blofeld James's adopted brother and gave them this ridiculous, like, soap opera style story about, you know, Blofeld's father adopting James and you know, almost treating him as a better son than he treated Blofeld. And it's so melodramatic and ridiculous, and it undermines all of the maturity and complexity of the story of Craig era Bond all the way, you know, back to Casino Royale, because as it transpires, Blofeld actually was the architect of Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, but his motivations are so simple and childish that it just really it undermines those films on some degree. This film does do him much better, because he is still a prominent presence, and he and James do get. I mean, Christoph Waltz is a great actor, and he and Daniel Craig get a great performance together. And even though it's only a small part of the film, because he's not the focus, their stuff together is really good. And again, the Blofeld stuff is much better handled here. But yeah, the Rami Malek stuff, it's a shame, but it just feels like his character is just... There's just something missing, and I can't fully put my finger on what it is, but it just is just lacking something. And yeah, this is a great ending. This is a great ending. This, like I said, this is not the best Craig film, but this is a phenomenal ending. And it will mean that when people look back and watch the sort of serialised story from Casino Royale to No Time to Die, you will see it as one complete story. And I think even its weaker points, specifically Quantum of Solace and aspects of Spectre, you will watch it back and feel those bits will be enhanced because the film as a whole feels like one narrative. And I think it starts so strong with Casino Royale and it ends really strong with No Time to Die. And I think that's very pleasing and satisfying. I do think it's a shame that we're letting go of some of these things. You know, this is a conclusion for all of the characters. You know, and some of the actors who played them are great. You know, particularly Ray Fiennes, Geoffrey Rush, Naomi Harris. Like, this is a great Ben Whishaw. These are such a great team. And it is a shame that this is the end, because I think wherever James Bond goes next will be a complete restart, a refresh, brand new story. And I think that is the way to go. I like the idea of taking Bond back to the 60s. Whatever they do with it, I want it to be a complete refresh of the James Bond franchise. But yeah, this is great. This was a great film. I'm really pleased that it's pulled it off. It was worth the wait, you know, with the pandemic delaying it, and I'm just delighted that we've had this phenomenal conclusion to the Craig era. So, absolutely delighted. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.